We'll call a meeting to order this morning of the House Agriculture Policy Committee. And a rather sparse crowd on hand so far. We do not have a quorum yet, so we'll take things a bit slowly until we do have that. We have 3 bills on the agenda today. 4 bills. Okay, how could I forget that one? Anyway, and we'll start off with the bill from Representative Quam. So good morning. And
good morning, Mr. Chair.
We'll have somebody introduce your bill, Representative Rarick. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
hang on just a second. We don't have a quorum yet, so we can't introduce the bill. But Representative Quam, let's walk through your bill and tell us the highlights and what your bill does.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And basically, over the years, I still have my corduroy blue jacket. And so I remember the FFA, and my son was in the FFA, both of them. And frankly, I think it's a great institution that's helped both the youth, the farmers, and the communities in Minnesota, greater Minnesota. And over the last few years, I've had many conversations when they've had FFA organizations meet up here at the Capitol or in regional activities of where they're short instructors. And part of that's because if you have a .3 position, it's tough to get someone to move to a town with only a part-time job. And you know, I had some discussions with some ag business people, you know, elevators and different businesses, and they would love to be active. Now, some of the larger corporations, and when I worked for some large corporations, they had rules that said if you were a salaried person, you could not take a second job. But we had a great deal of corporate-sponsored volunteer activities where we would go out and mentor and tutor, do different activities. And one of the thoughts was, in order to facilitate in some of the greater Minnesota rural areas, agronomists and other highly trained community ag experts that were working for maybe a large company or a company that had a policy that the salaried personnel could not take a second job, that an arrangement could be made. Now, being on a school board, I am fully aware that you first exhaust all avenues for licensed staff when you post. But I remember a position for keyboarding in elementary school that we could not find licensed staff to take, you know, a .3 position, and therefore we went and found a community expert, and this is, Byron is within a few miles of Rochester, so it wasn't in an extremely rural area, but we still came across that. And so the intent is to allow options when there are no applicants that are licensed in the field that would take the position. So this bill would not prevent any licensed staff from taking a position, but would allow a school in a rural ag community to staff. And I notice there's some counting going on. Are we at a level where motions can be made?
Thanks, Representative Quam. We do have enough members here now to officially have a quorum. So would Representative Rarick care to move the bill?
Mr. Chair, would you like me to do the minutes first?
You want to do the minutes also?
I'll move the minutes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Representative Rarick moves to approve the minutes from February 18th. I'm sure you've all had a chance to peruse them. All in favor of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. Now, Ms. Representative Rarick.
Mr. Chair, thanks. I would like to move House File 475 be re-referred to the Committee on Education Innovation Policy.
Very good, thank you. Representative Quam, any further comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just that there are other bills trying to address the difficulty and shortage of ag instruction, and that the final intent when we hit the committee that's going to pull that together is to have this as to be held over for possible inclusion of an omnibus for, you know, wording and bringing those bills together. And so this is appropriate to move on to the education finance, but at some point this will be hopefully utilized to improve the wording of a final portion or section of an omnibus bill.
Well, we certainly have seen that there is a need for this type of thing, shortages in ag education in our high schools. Any questions from members? Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just a question about some other bills that are related to ag education. I know that I have one that I'm carrying and I think has been sent to this committee, and I'm just wondering about when those bills might be heard.
Representative, we have a fairly busy agenda schedule, and we'll get to those bills, I would guess, in the next couple of weeks. But we have every intent to get to bills such as those because they are important to the ag community. So you have my assurance we will hear those bills.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just it kind of goes with what Representative Quam was saying. I mean, there isn't one silver bullet. There needs to be probably a number of bills and a number of proposals that we would consider. So I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I have a couple myself that we hope to hear along the way as well. Any other questions from members? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Quam. My question, you know, I prepare teachers, and these folks are going to be teaching in the classroom, and, you know, I do this, I prepare social studies teachers, and I focus on their understanding of the content, that sort of thing, and I could see where community experts would have that understanding and could demonstrate that understanding, and I would assume, first of all, would they need to demonstrate the understanding of the content area that would be taught?
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative. As in any community expert, there are criteria that the board looks at, as in the, you know, it's stipulated, apply to the Board of Teaching for approval to accept sponsored, non-licensed. So there's a defined process. I haven't been on the school board for some time now. And I'm not absolutely sure if that's been tweaked, but there's a definition of what you know you would make to be able to be a community expert. And I think the big shift for the ag, it's highly specialized, and some of the wording in here is because those instructors also have the function of being the advisor for the FFA chapter. And there's a lot of community activities. It's like a coaching position. And that's part of the activity. So it's not a normal baseline topic course. And I have found, talking with several ag instructors who have put off retirement because their district can't find a replacement, and they don't want to see their, at times, decades-long history of a strong FFA chapter go to the wayside because there's no one to take their spot. Just like in farms, it's hard to find people coming up, and I can assure you that, you know, they work hard trying to recruit, and we wouldn't come forward with a bill like this if there weren't situations of need. And I apologize, I can't quote the the rules and guidelines that the board uses when they determine whether to accept or not. But it's not the local board that has the final decision. It goes to the Board of Teaching.
Representative Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As a follow-up, and I agree with you. There's no doubt there's a need. I in total agreement with you on that. But it's also the quality of the teaching that needs to be done. And these are teaching our neighbors' children, and there's a lot more to it, which also relates to, would the teachers be required to take child development, addressing standards and that sort of thing, that the many tools that teachers use as professionals to make sure they're ready to teach the kids in the pedagogy end of it.
I would just quickly add that those will be addressed in the Education Committee, but a quick answer, Representative Quam.
The quick answer is that it's a teaching team at the high school level of where these classes will be taught, and therefore I have high confidence that the school system would have members of the team that could fully cover those additional concerns.
Representative Johnson.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll lay off on that because I respect that. But I think what I do want to compliment you on the concept that you're working with. If I understand this bill right, you're talking about community experts working with licensed teachers. And based on what the feedback I get in my area, I'm thinking of the trades in particularly, where we're having trouble finding people to teach the basic trades. I think there's some room to move here, and this may be, again, where ag education is kind of providing a model beyond only ag education, where this united effort might be a model to, if done well, it's got to be done well, and I'll count on that ed committee to do that. But it does offer an opportunity to just kind of release some of that pressure on how we're finding folks to teach in some high-pressure areas. So thanks for bringing it forward.
Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's following along Representative Johnson's questions a little bit, but I don't serve on K-12, and so I don't really know the current exemptions or allowances for community experts. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, if Representative Quam would just be able to briefly answer, is this an additional area? Is this something that, I thought that community experts that exists, they can already do this. And so what is different about this than what currently could be done by a school district?
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Basically, the difference is when you have a highly educated agronomist or in that position and they're salaried, I did come across that there are policies that don't allow a salaried person to be working a second job. It's part of the agreement they have, because you don't have a fixed hours. And this is to make sure that that could be overcome.
Representative Pompey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds. I understand that this is ag policy, but so Representative Quam, are you stating then that you're trying to change? I'm just trying to figure out which door you're going in. Are you trying to go in the back door of the company then, telling them that they need to allow the person to be able to be salaried and have the allowance to do this? Or is this a policy for the Board of Teaching that's saying we don't accept salaried people to do adjunct teaching?
Representative Quam.
Mr. Chair, Representative Poppy, it's basically allowing compatibility with some of the company policies for people. So it's more of a company type thing. Mm-hmm. I don't see it as changing the Board of Teaching's determination on the qualification or capability of the community expert. So it is more of that, but because education is a very intertwined area, and so you need to have it I guess, delineated so you don't have the problem. So yes, it's more for the companies and would not change the parameters and qualifications for the Board of Teaching to approve.
I think maybe what we could be trying to get at here from different ways is, would these community experts that come into the school who may be salaried in their regular jobs, would they be volunteering their time, or would they be compensated by the schools?
Mr. Chair, it would be a voluntary agreement similar to mentoring programs that are fairly common in Minnesota and across the nation for between companies and schools. And then also it would allow for, in the supervisor position of being an ag advisor, that's similar to a coaching position. And that's why it's a little tricky, and we'll see how things work out. I plan to have a few discussions with the Board of Teaching, just to make sure that there aren't any additional concerns that they may have. But when I've talked to them on other issues, they have their guidelines and they follow them.
Okay, Representative Poppy, okay?
No, I'm not okay, but I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Representative Lewick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Quam. Just a comment, one of the school districts I represent had exactly one of those long-term 35-year ag teachers that retired, and we just had a heck of a time bridging the gap. We've been fortunate enough to finally get the service of a full-time ag teacher, but what gets lost in this sometimes is these children are in there on a 3-year program. And if you need to bring in community experts or whatever to help bridge that gap, if you get a primary teacher retires and now you're borrowing here to fill that gap, you've got a responsibility here to make sure that that curriculum, that those young people start year 1 is still intact at year 3, because if you lose it or foul it up, you've really damaged. I mean, they've made a huge choice as to what they're going to spend at least last 3 years in high school studying. So this looks like it provides at least some more flexibility, Representative Johnson had commented about the situation we get into with trades also, because we have a program in a couple of our schools where in the industrial arts area, we build a house that's designed to be moved, sold. Those proceeds go back into that project every year. It's getting harder and harder to find house builders, let alone house builders with teaching credentials. So there's another area where we really need to be careful, and where there's an opportunity to bring in that technical expertise that's licensed up to the hilt in another area, and just make sure they're working with a group of well-educated and teachers, principals. It's going to make sure that we're doing the right thing there, but we've got to look at every opportunity. So again, I want to thank you, and this is something that I wish we'd had that level of flexibility a few years ago when we struggled to keep our ag program in place, and we were successful, but it was a long haul. But anyway, thank you again, Representative Quam.
Anybody in the audience care to testify on the bill? Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Chair, my name is Jerry Schoenfeld. I work for the Minnesota Association of Agricultural Educators, and we are pretty neutral on the bill, but I did want to point out a couple of things. One is that agricultural education, traditionally, some of the great advantages I think it's had is the fact that there are kind of 3 rings to ag education. One is the academic area that most of you are familiar with in terms of the classroom and so forth. The second one is something called the Supervised Agricultural Experience Program, which involves some of the mentoring and some of the apprenticeships, in a sense, working with businesses and other people to provide a hands-on experiential learning opportunity for the student. In addition to that is the FFA, which is also provides really two areas. One is the leadership area that most of you are familiar with the Blue Jackets here and the fact that they're able to get ahead of this committee and make a pretty good presentation. That's leadership that they learn in terms of speaking and parliamentary procedure and a lot of those kinds of things. In addition to that is what's basically outcome-based learning situation with FFA, because the FFAs have got their individual, along with the classroom, you have the academic experience in the classroom, but the FFA is the opportunity for them to compete team against team, soils team against soils team, management team against management team, and so forth across the state in terms of proving what their knowledge from the classroom is. And it's basically a way to assess what the classroom activities come forth. So the only reason I point this out is because I think that as you look into this kind of a thing, there already is a statute, and matter of fact, it's a statute that Representative Quam is amending, that provides for community-based experts. And so there already is a way to do this. There is the difference of, and I was glad to hear what the point was, that this is a non-paid position, because in the terms of normal community experts, they are paid by the school district. And the second thing I think about the bill from what I've read is a little different, is that the idea that more than one person could be in this position, that you could have multiple people providing different talents in this. There's not, from our position, we think we need to do not Band-Aids, and I don't mean to put your bill down, but it is kind of a Band-Aid to fix what's been discussed ahead of the committee. And so one of the parts of that, and the reason I bring up at the Supervised Ag Experience Program and the FFA program, is that one of the great losses that we had over the years was when we went from teachers that taught year-round to 9 months. Because that FFA experience, and particularly that Supervised Ag experience where this mentoring takes place, was lost in large part because of the loss of the summer program. And so we do have bills that are coming through the legislature this year to try and help bring some of that back. It also, quite frankly, would help with teachers' retention, because quite frankly, when teachers come out with an ag ed degree, they have a very good degree to go to Monsanto and Cargill and a million other agribusinesses and industries. And one of the things that they do that for is, quite frankly, because they're paid twice as much in those areas as they are in education. So the 12-month kind of concept was one of the things that traditionally kept ag teachers in ag teaching, because they were able to make a little bit more money. So there's kind of two sides, maybe, that you're not supposed to talk about that side, but the fact is, in terms of retention of teachers, it plays a role. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I wanted to say, just as we talk about this, and I hope I can work with Representative Quam on this as it goes to the Education Committee, some of the continuing discussion about those kinds of things that I know you mentioned you're going to talk about ag education, and those components are things that are kind of missing right now in many, many cases.
Thank you, Mr. Schoenfeld. Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Mr. Schoenfeld because you kind of hit the nail there with this is education versus apprenticeship a little bit. And I very much appreciate that you gave the description of the three aspects of what a faculty member would do who is an ag educator. And I agree that we need to have maybe some community experts that can provide some assistance with the apprenticeship and mentoring part, but the education piece kind of goes back to Representative Johnson, and Representative Lueck also talked about it a little bit, about the consistency and continuity and the ability to take a student from point A to point B to eventually Z, and that they have that continuity and ability to be educated through along that process. So thank you, Mr. Schoenfeld, for pointing that out.
Representative Quam, any closing comments on your bill?
Just that I knew there was going to be someone coming. I didn't know specifically he was to add that. And more hour, when I think of the ag instructors that I know, more hours are outside the school day and outside the school calendar for these positions. And that's why it's a little bit unusual. And I hope you'll allow me to move on to the Education Committee to have the discussions and the more detailed drilling that we'll do on the education side of this.
I'm sure that'll take place. Thank you very much. Representative Rurick, would you care to renew your motion?
I will renew my motion that House File 475 be re-referred to the Committee on Education Innovation Policy.
Representative Rarick renews his motion that House File 475 be re-referred to the Committee on Education Innovative Policy. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The motion passed. Thanks, Representative. Next bill on the agenda is House File 815. Who would like to move that bill? Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that House File 815 be referred to the Committee on Transportation Policy and Finance.
Very good, thank you. Representative Dill, good morning, and please explain your bill for our committee.
Good morning, Chair. 815 comes from a constituent request, actually, and when I first listened to it, I thought, and then the more I thought about it, I thought, yeah, this is something we should be looking into. And frankly, what is happening is that the biomass industry for different uses, including in our area in the iron mining community, of turning turbines with steam using agricultural byproducts, woody biomass, things of that nature, is becoming more and more prevalent. And as it becomes more and more prevalent, particularly with the Mintac, Minnesota Steel, U.S. Steel's plant Mintac, the big giant one that you see as you cross the Iron Range on the left on 53, they've converted for meeting air quality purposes to agricultural products and woody biomass. So the reach has expanded and expanded and expanded. It expanded to almost all the way into Montana, Wyoming, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba. And so they're going out and they're getting all kinds of things, the normal things. But one of the things that my constituent had happened to him was he was hauling oat hulls, not oats, not the oat. He was hauling the oat hull, which then they used to burn. And so there was a weight check, and he was hauling at a weight that is not described in the language that's currently in law. And if you look at that, it talks about raw and unprocessed. Well, oat hulls are not either of those, as are other products that are processed and then there's a residue. So what this bill does is it changes raw and unprocessed into qualifying agricultural products. And if you look at the second page of the bill in subdivision 6, it then defines what qualifying agricultural products are. And if you look on 2.16, it's a raw or unprocessed agricultural product. So that puts it back in where we deleted it in the further part of the bill. And then it adds number 2, which solves the problem. Agricultural products and feedstocks, including but not limited to oat hulls, there's more, but not limited to, transported for processing as biofuel. So it's quite narrow. Now, Mr. Chairman, members, there has been an amendment worked out to even narrow that down a little bit more. I'm not going to bring that before you because I'll do that in transportation. I have it. It's very narrow. But I'm not, I think you have a rule on your amendments, and that's fine. I'm just letting you know that this is continuing to be a work in progress. And so they'll still have to buy the same plates, timber, agricultural. They'll still have to do everything the same, except it re-qualifies certain things that aren't qualified right now under the law so that we can actually meet renewable energy standards and the objectives that have been placed before us. So that is the crux of the bill. It's brought to me by a constituent. You may have heard of him, or at least his father. His name is Kevin Nagurski. He owns Rainy Lake Oil, and his father is very famous, Bronco Nagurski. And Kevin graduated with my wife. He's a fine person from the International Falls Hospital. He has a spectacular business.
Very good. Questions from members? Anybody in the audience who would care to testify in favor of this bill? No? Anybody? Let's open the doors. Anybody who would want to testify in favor or against the bill?
Thanks for that.
Good morning, and please identify yourself.
Yes, thank you. My name is Abby Bryduck. I work for the Association of Minnesota Counties, and I'm also here sort of pinch hitting for the Townships Association as well. We appreciate the representatives' willingness to sort of narrow the scope of this bill, but we do need to share with their committee that the townships and the counties have a longstanding position against any exemptions to weight restrictions. We certainly recognize that agricultural industries need to use the highway systems to be as efficient as possible, but we need adequate funding to maintain our systems and possibly make improvements that reduce the number of deficient roads and bridges that need to be posted and that could then handle these loads. Every year we see that there are new weight limits exemptions proposed, as well as proposals that would ease enforcement. These limits are in place for a good reason, to preserve our road system and to get as much life out of them as possible. And without strong and consistent enforcement, the limits and posted roads and bridges are often seen as suggestions and not requirements. It would be appropriate, and of course we'll have a more expanded discussion about the impact on the road in the Transportation Committee, but I do think it's important for this committee to just, if we do see exemptions approved, that you don't take that decision lightly, that there are reasons why we have these in place. We do have a lot of challenges with enforcement. And so we'd just like you to consider those things, and like I said, not to make a decision lightly. So that's really all I have to say, and I'd take any questions if you had some.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience, Representative, or from the members? Representative Lewick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Correct me if I'm wrong, Representative Dill, but this does not change any weight limits as far as what is allowed for, I guess, whole oats, rolled oats, cracked oats. This speaks specifically to oat hulls, but we're not changing how much we can haul, let's put it this way, similar products? Is that
Representative
correct?
Dill.
Well, Representative Lewick, thank you for that question. In fact, that's exactly correct. And this would not have any impact on the counties or the townships in the sense that they will still have to post the same roads the same way, because trucks at the 90,000 or whatever weight is legal will continue to travel on those roads irregardless of this bill. The same posting, same problem. Now, is it possible that there might be more traffic? That is possible at a higher weight. But, I mean, it's very odd that I would be at odds with townships and counties, and they're always my friends, and they still are. But in this instance, this is some common sense legislation that actually clarifies something that's already going on and is going on at the higher weights because it's a gray area that is being interpreted to not be gray any longer under this bill.
I would just have a question, Representative, kind of along farmer lines. Oats are usually not real heavy, and I would think oat hulls would be even lighter. So these loads would be looking at that, those weight limits on those trucks, huh?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The biomass hauling trailers are as large as they possibly can be, limited within because of the volume. And the same you would find in the woody biomass arena, where a log is chipped. A log in its original version is more dense than when you aerotain chips that are blown into a trailer. So to get a similar weight, you're hauling air. I mean, it's like a taconite pellet versus, which is 65% iron, and a masaba nugget that's 98% iron. You remove the air from the taconite pellet, and you have a masaba nugget. I mean, that's the layman's way. It's cheaper to ship. You know, it's kind of the reverse idea because you're hauling more weight with less density, but in this instance, you're hauling more weight. Am I getting that right? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I get it. Very good. Any other questions from the audience or members of the committee? Representative Dill, any closing comments?
I think we're all understand it and either love it or hate it.
Okay. Representative Anderson?
Mr. Chair, I renew my motion that House File 815 be re-referred to the Committee on Transportation and Policy and Finance.
Representative Anderson renews his motion that House File 815 be re-referred to the Committee on Transportation Policy and Finance. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Congratulations. Next bill on the agenda, House File 683. And as Representative or Vice Chair Franson makes her way down to the testifier's table, the bill number is 683. And Representative Franson, would you like to move your bill?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move that House File 683 be re-referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections.
And do you also have an amendment?
Yes.
Would you like to
Mr.
move that?
Chair, I move the A1 amendment.
A1. Representative Franson moves the A1 amendment to her bill. Any discussion on the A1 amendment? If not, all in favor of the A1 amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
No, same sign. The amendment is approved. Representative Franson, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. First, I want to wish everybody a happy hemp day. And I have Phyllis, Representative Phyllis Kahn up with me as well. She has worked on this issue for many, many years, and I want her to be with me every step of the way as we move this bill through committee. So, hemp is one of the most historically versatile agricultural crops that has sadly also been one of the most historically maligned. Unfairly confused with its cousin marijuana, which I'm opposed to, for decades, hemp contains insignificant amounts of THC that compounds that renders a high. Furthermore, the federal government has now defined industrial hemp as having a THC level less than 0.3% in the 2014 Farm Bill. The guidelines in Section 7606 of the Farm Bill form the basis for this legislation. Hemp is not marijuana. Hemp cannot get you high. While they are the same species of plant, Cannabis sativa, they have vastly different uses, cultivators, and compositions, and should be considered differently, much like sweet corn and field corn. Currently, hemp products must be imported from foreign sources like Canada and China. Hemp is the only agricultural commodity restricted to import-only status. The versatility of hemp, and we've got some products that our page will pass out that you can take a look at. We've got some lotion in there and some milk and some bread and all kinds of goodies for you to see exactly what hemp can be turned into. Hemp has literally thousands of applications in modern day life. Consumer products derived from the hemp plant fall into two broad categories. Those deriving from the seed, those derived from the fiber or stalks, and from the seed, food, animals, feeds, biofuels, solvents, cosmetics, and plants. The hemp seed is nutritious, rich in omega-3s and protein. Fiber stalks can be turned into clothing, cordage, biocompounds, paper, fiberboard, insulation, packaging products, and even concrete and other construction materials. Simply put, this bill authorizes the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to conduct a pilot program to study the growth, cultivation, and marketing of industrial hemp, consistent with the federal guidelines established in last year's Farm Bill. This limited scale pilot will provide valuable information going forward. Producing hemp in Minnesota has the potential to create a host of jobs, both on the agricultural production side as well as processing and manufacturing jobs. During the Second World War II, Minnesota was one of the largest producers of domestic hemp for the war effort. In fact, I read a newspaper from the Winona, Minnesota from 1937 touting two hemp manufacturing facilities established there and the many jobs they supported. Recent movement on the federal level gives us hope for the future. Bills are now pending to authorize the full-scale commercial production. We've lost a great deal of time and economic opportunity on hemp due to confusion, misinformation, and confounding public policy. This bill seeks to develop, on a very small scale, the foundations and information necessary in developing new opportunities and applications for hemp in Minnesota, benefiting our state and rural economies through a regulated and focused program. HF 683, the bill, authorizes the Commissioner of Ag to administer the pilot project, authorizes institutions of higher education to participate, permits the establishment of rules consistent with federal guidelines, and defines hemp as an agricultural crop in Minnesota. This also allows the Commissioner to establish fees and enforcement of the chapter and defines industrial hemp as having not more than 0.3% THC. I ask members for their support. And Representative Khan, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I'm very pleased.
Representative, could you identify
Yes.
yourself for the record, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Phyllis Khan. I'm very pleased to join Representative Franson in this effort, and I think the person we most have to thank for why we've been able to come this far is my good friend, Senator Mitch McConnell in the U.S. Senate, who is, I think, the person responsible for getting the liberalization into the Farm Bill, last year's Farm Bill. And because of his effort, Kentucky has moved way ahead of Minnesota. We have people who are particularly willing to supply hemp seeds to Kentucky, and it's time for Minnesota to move to catch up. And I'm very grateful to Representative Franson for taking on this issue at this time.
Representative Franson, just a quick question. You passed around a number of articles and products. Are these all available here in Minnesota stores?
That is correct, Representative Paul Anderson. These are all available here in Minnesota. However, we have to actually import the product from elsewhere because we are unable legally to grow hemp in the state of Minnesota.
Are they processed or made here in Minnesota?
No, they are not.
Okay. Okay. Any questions from members? Representative Chair Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the testifiers, what happens, I believe there's a licensing component to this. What happens if a person grows it and they're not licensed?
That is correct.
Representative Franson.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Representative, forgot your name. Hamilton. So excited.
It's the hemp.
First, before I answer your question, I just want to thank you, too, for the efforts that you have put into this bill in the past as well, Representative Hamilton. So to your question, Section 5.28 to 5.30 addresses your concern. If somebody is growing hemp that is not licensed, would be guilty of a misdemeanor. On Section 6.3 to 6.4, if they are growing marijuana, they are going to be prosecuted under federal law. And a marijuana grower does not want their crop anywhere near a hemp field because it will render their marijuana crop useless.
Chair Hamilton. Representative Khan.
I just wanted to make an addition to that. Apparently, after Colorado did its legalization of marijuana along with hemp, one of the first fields had $1 million crop totally ruined because of its proximity to an industrial hemp, which had been growing in Colorado for some time. And genetically, one of the arguments we used to have is that people are going to hide the real stuff, this stuff around it, and what that does is ruin both crops.
Representative Nornis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And can I take this home? This
Well,
is
that's
the
my office.
the moisturizer, and I notice it's distributed out of Texas. I don't know if that's where it's actually manufactured, but it's in Texas. Directions say smooth generously over your entire body daily. We need a bigger container
Yeah.
than this one.
But not during committee, Representative. Representative Franson, you know, there's mainly federal law. Does federal law distinguish between marijuana and industrial hemp?
Yes, it does.
Okay,
It is clearly written.
okay.
And we do have some testifiers as well,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Questions from committee members? If not, any testifiers from the audience? Okay. Good morning, and identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Tom Peterson. I represent the Minnesota Farmers Union. We strongly support House File 683, and which you've heard a lot about, and worked on this bill. I think all 13 years I've been with Farmers Union, and always have seen a lot of support for it in the countryside. You know, farmers will always tell you, a lot of the older farmers and people in the towns you represent can tell you where the hemp factories were during World War II, and they made rope and all kinds of fibers that were important. But as Representative Franson said, I think a real game changer and a real surprise for us was the language that was in the Farm Bill that is going to allow us to move forward with this. So we see other states as Kentucky, Colorado, Washington really picking up the ball and moving forward with this. A couple of points I wanted to make, and you've heard all the things that it's used for. Over the time that I've been working on this, now I see it also, the harvesting has gotten a lot easier, and a lot of people are even looking at it for animal feed and also for animal bedding, which I think is really interesting. Just a couple of things I think is always interesting for the Ag Committee to consider is that hemp grows very similar to corn, 100 to 110 days, but it uses very low inputs. So very low pesticides, fertilizers. It generally does not need as much water to grow to maturity. Hemp is generally combined and baled, or a lot of people now are chopping hemp as well, which I think is kind of interesting. We see, Farmers Union sees hemp developing a couple of different ways in Minnesota. If we ever got beyond the test plot, hopefully, it would most likely be farmers who would grow it as a niche and then process it themselves, very small operations. Or you would most likely have a company, and this is what we see in other countries, would go into, say, Alexandria, and then they would contract with area farmers around Alexandria to grow it. It's not probably going to have, you're not going to have the factory in Alexandria, and then you're going to have people in Pine City growing it or people in Mankato growing it. It's going to be around where the manufacturing is, and I think that's an interesting point, but it's really a good one. Also in Canada, I'm also interested in the numbers, because they always say is we're going to grow it everywhere if we ever had it all over. But in Canada, they grow on average 10 to 50,000 acres per year. So on average, a lot of the counties you represent grow anywhere from 100 to 300,000 acres of corn. So it's not, going to be widespread, but it will be an interesting market for people that want to look at that. In closing, just a couple other quick comments. I really feel, in looking at Colorado and Washington, visiting with our farmers unions in other states, that the pilot projects are really important, because looking at seed availability has been a real issue, soils, and things like that it grows. We're also working on the federal legislation that would take this to the next level, which is authored by Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell. And appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson, you mentioned the acreage in Canada, about 10 to 50,000 acres. So does that sufficiently fill the market demand for the product in Canada, would you estimate?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it's kind of interesting. I actually haven't talked to him this year, but 2 years ago when we had this bill before the committee, I actually called a couple of farmers I was put in touch with in Canada, and they said it's real spotty, on the market, and it's still a new industry. It's still, 10, 12 years old, and so they're still trying to figure out how not to overproduce. And some years they have extras that they didn't grow, and other years they don't have enough. So because it's still kind of a new industry, they're trying to find the good spot for how much acres to grow.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members? Chair Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And is there, how difficult would it be to get a manufacturing plant up and running? Is it something where we have existing plants that could do a retrofit or whatever? Or will there be, I guess what I'm asking is if we are able to grow it tomorrow, do we have a market for it?
Mr. Peterson.
Mr. Chair, I'm not an expert on that, but I in the research and different meetings I've been at, I know in Kentucky that from what I've seen, there's all kinds of companies looking at that. One of the interesting things I know, and I met a person who's looking at concrete, or they call it hempcrete, and that is a really big developing in other nations where concrete's a huge carbon emitter, but made with hemp, it is really important. And so it'll depend, because if you're using it for livestock feed or biofuels, it might be quicker than other things. And but I know there's a lot of, the interesting point about this issue, or it gets down to our members, is they are making these products, around a lot in Canada. Canada's major export is to the United States. So we're not growing it, but we're buying their stuff, so.
Mr. Peterson, I had raised a question back when the university study was heard here in committee and asked about the possibility of industrial hemp becoming a noxious weed again, like it, I guess, was at one point. Do you have any experience talking with growers in Canada or any other place that could that become a problem with widespread cultivation of this as a crop?
Mr. Chair, that's also one of the questions I've had, in trying to look at this and trying to visit with people. Because a lot of you will even say, I talked to a farmer about this in Todd County, who they, and around, people will still say there's strands of it in Minnesota from when we had it years ago, and it just reseeds itself every year. Some of you have probably seen it in your fields. And it was on the noxious weed list in Minnesota until a few years ago, and it was taken off it because it was deemed not to be a problem. And I would guess, just like any other thing, if it's not controlled and it's not kept on top of, it could spread and could be an issue. But in Minnesota, I think the farmers are able to control it. And I think that's also why the test plots and the pilot is important, and that would be one thing we would want to look at in those pilots. So good question.
Representative Khan.
Well, this is, Mr. Chairman, this is a story from a long time ago, but I did find some growing on the St. Paul campus, agricultural campus at one point, I think right next to the dean's building. So.
Okay. Anybody else wish to testify either for or against the bill? If not, Representative Franson, do you have any closing comments on your bill?
No, it's a good bill. I hope everybody votes yes on it. And once again, happy Hemp Day.
Representative Franson renews her motion that House File 683 as amended be re-referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections. All those in favor of passage, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same side. The motion passes. Congratulations. Our last bill on today's agenda, House File 779. And at the table is Chair Hamilton. Chair, would you care to move your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that House File 779 be re-referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections.
And do you have an amendment for your bill?
I do, Mr. Chairman. The amendment is the A2 amendment. I believe, and I'd like to move the A2 amendment to get the bill in the order in which I'd like to discuss it, if you would, please.
Any discussion on the author's A2 amendment? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The motion passes.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative Hamilton, to your bill as amended.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you, Representative Khan and Representative Franson. My hands have never felt so soft. That was really nice lotion there. So I appreciate it. So, Mr. Chairman, this was an idea that was brought forth by a number of folks that were working on this, various ag organizations. I know we worked with individuals within colleges and universities, and it was fun to watch this develop into what it is here today. And I do have Mr. Jerry Schoenfeld here to kind of explain the process and what's in the bill. So in essence of time, Mr. Chairman, can we go ahead and turn to the testifier? Is that okay?
Certainly. Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jerry Schoenfeld, and I'm actually representing 3 different groups in this effort today. I work with the Minnesota Pork Producers, the Minnesota Soybean Growers, and the Minnesota Association of Agricultural Educators. And as you look to your screen, you'll see that support for this bill is quite broad. It started with some of the commodity groups talking to others and putting together their concerns. And then since that time, Minnesota Farmers Union, Minnesota Association of Ag Educators, the Minnesota Veterinary Medical Association, and the Minnesota Forest Industry, with the inclusion of this amendment, are also supporters of the bill. If we click to the next one here, do we just do this? Okay. Wanted to give you a little background. Can we go back one? The objectives created, basically, we want to give you a little background on the Ag Coalition's proposal here. The objectives created basically are to provide additional research capabilities through improved infrastructure and accountability. Secondly, to improve the rapid response system for emergency crop and animal diseases, and to do what is necessary to increase entry and retention of high school ag education and farm business management. And much of the discussion that has occurred in this committee thus far has talked about various components of these different items. The Rapid Response Fund is the second piece of that, is part that we have had a new disease almost every year that has invaded Minnesota, whether it's PED last year with pork, which could, in many cases, take 20% of the hogs in the state, or whether it's going back as far as wheat years ago, or things that we've been concerned about on many different levels, and including forestry. We seem to have a new beetle attack us about every year. And so part of the Rapid Response Fund was to deal with those new emerging diseases in a more rapid way than what the traditional university response was. So those are the objectives. If we go to the next one, and we take a look, the agricultural research, as most of you know, has been a great aid in reducing farm costs, increasing production, and protect the environment. And genomic research is a really important part for the future. And one of the things I'd like to say about agricultural research, and why I think that this is a timely bill, is the fact that so much is changing in terms of agricultural research. It used to be fairly broad-based research. We're now getting to a point which includes everything from the drones that are flying over, to the satellites, to looking at specific farms and determining on a specific farm what the appropriate response is in terms of soil fertility, in terms of genetics, in terms of how wide that buffer strip should be, all of those kinds of things, that we're now getting to a precision agriculture situation, and this is one of the things that we think this can aid with. Next one. If you take a look at the next slide, one of the things that it compares here is the amount of Minnesota average in terms of Minnesota's reliance on food and agriculture. One of the things that's significant about Minnesota is the fact that we really have a strong reliance on food and agriculture in this state, much more than many other states. And if you take a look at that slide, you'll see some of the comparisons between the national average, which is the black line on the bottom, and the red line on top, which is Minnesota's reliance. And then a comparison of the top 5 and the bottom 5 states. So it plots the shares of each state's value added in food and agriculture as a share of the gross state product from 1963 to 2012. If we take a look at the next slide, you'll see that in the state of Minnesota, where the agriculture value is located, we're number 4 in crop cash receipts in Minnesota. You'll see there that Number 1 in sugar beets, sweet corn processing, and green peas for processing. Number 2 in wild rice. Number 3 in soybeans, spring wheat, and canola. Number 4 in corn, dry edible beans, flaxseed. And number 5 in sunflowers. And so overall, we're number 5 in total agricultural receipts. Number 7 in livestock agricultural receipts. So agriculture is a very important part of it. And if you take a look at the total receipts, agriculture is $21.5 billion. Add the forestry in there at $9.7 billion out of the total GDP for the state of $324 billion. The next slide will give you some idea about the ranking of Minnesota. We are number 6 in terms of the ranking of value of gross value of production. However, we're number 10 in terms of the amount of money that we spend on our agricultural experiment stations for research and development. Now, much has been talked about research and development in terms of not only public research and development, but also private research and development. And there are those who would say, you know, we should let the private, the Monsantos of the world do this. And I guess none of us that represent the agricultural commodities agree with that. From the standpoint that we think that you need a strong public research capability. You can work cooperatively with the private research, but you need a strong research that is on a public venue, first of all, to keep it non-biased and also so that you're not totally tied to individual companies. Next one, if I could say, the traditional research engine for the University of Minnesota, and that's our primary location for agricultural research, has been what's called the agricultural special. And I don't know if there's anybody in here that is on the higher education committee. Representative Bly. And I'm sorry, I didn't see Representative Norris. Yes, I should probably note the chair. But in any case, the agricultural special is something that has been around for a very long time, and I put down that it was over 40 years because I've only been here 35 years, and I know it was before my time, so I'm not sure how far it goes back. But the agricultural special, to give you a comparison, in the year 2001 was the peak of the amount of funding through the agricultural special for the university. It was at $58,838,000. In 2014, it goes unchanged in terms of the university request from the previous biennium, and it's maintained at $42,922,000. That's a $16 million drop approximately in those 14 years. And that's been a concern to a number of people in agriculture. And that there are many places that the ag research at our CFANs and experiment stations receive funds from. Unfortunately, most of those areas that they have received have actually decreased. So if you take a look at the next slide, what we're saying there is the $30 million request that's in this bill would help to restore cuts made over the 14 years. It does not adjust it for inflation over that time, so it doesn't really catch up to those dollars in 2001. But it would make a great advancement in that. And those significant cuts have caused problems, I think, throughout agricultural research. I work with the Minnesota soybean growers as an example, and I asked them to put together some of their concerns or things that they've had to do over the years. And most of you know the commodity councils do provide dollars that come in through commodity checkoffs, and those checkoffs are primarily spent on agricultural research. And so there's a partnership here in this proposal that is between the public and the private as such with the agricultural commodity councils and the University of Minnesota and the state legislature in terms of the public funding. To give you an example, I'll just speak to the one group, the Minnesota soybean growers. They have put together, or over the year period of 2008 to 2014, they spent $12.5 million of their checkoff funds going to university research. Much of that was spent in northwestern Minnesota because one of the things that happened during that time is that the top two of the top three counties in the state that have increased soybean yields, or not yields, but soybean production. The leaders in the state are in northwestern Minnesota. And Representative Johnson is an example. You and I would think that southern Minnesota has a lock on soybeans, but that is not true. If you take a look at where they are, they're now up, well, they certainly are in southern Minnesota, but they're also in Norman County and Polk County. And Polk and Marshall County are number 1 and 2 in the state, which was even a shock to me to find out. But the fact is that the whole growing season, everything has moved north, and much of that has happened because of research dollars that have gone into providing varieties and opportunities in those areas. And in southern Minnesota, one of the things that we've had to face is things like aphids and white mold and some of these other kinds of diseases that have come in that have not necessarily been up in that part of the state so much. So there's been great opportunities to expand in that part of the state. And that's one of the things that they put their funds into. But one of the things that I wanted to point out was that when money comes from these research councils, and whether it's corn growers or whether it's wheat or whether it's soybeans or pork, pork puts about $1.2 million a year into research as well. Wherever it comes from, most of them are limited by federal law as to how they can spend their funds. And one of the things they can do is they can help start up situations, and they have. For instance, the soybean growers, since 1995, have funded 7 new faculty positions at the University of Minnesota. 7 new faculty positions, but they can only fund them for 1 to 2 years. And after that time, something else has to take over. And so that's one of the problems. Corn, for instance, we have representatives up here in the audience from there, indicated at one of our meetings that they had money to give for research projects, but the university, for instance, didn't always have the staff available to be able to take on all of the projects. And so there's concern about that. And so this is to try and look at the human infrastructure that is, we feel is short at the research facilities. And whether they be the outreach centers like Waseca or Lamberton or Morris, or whether they be at the St. Paul campus in CFANS, we're trying to reestablish our position with regard to research capabilities and the human infrastructure that supports that. So keep that in mind, that this isn't an attempt to try and get more projects for any one section of ag. This is an attempt to try and build the research capabilities. And those research capabilities go across the board, whether it's inorganic farming or organic farming, plant breeders, diseases attack the same things. It doesn't make any difference what the plant is. And so that's the kind of thing that we're trying to take a look. When PED comes in town, it doesn't specify, I'm only going to go on this farm or that farm. It goes after all the hogs. And so that's one of the things to keep in mind, and that this is about human research. The kinds of things that the investments have been made in terms of the short term, the 1 or 2 year startup for some of these people have been things like plant pathology, entomology, agronomy, molecular genetics, and soybean breeding. As a matter of fact, the soybean growers, as an example, have put $367,000 into support of the new soybean breeder at CFANS. And, but the position, some other positions have gone vacant. For instance, there's a position at Crookston that has remained vacant since 2011 because of lack of funds. So that's what we're taking a look at. The next one on the slide you've got here is to take a look at specifically that agricultural state spending special. And you can see that I mentioned that in 2001 it was at its height of 58 million per year. So about 116 million for the biennium, and you'll see what it's done over the last number of years in terms of decreasing or remaining stagnant. One of the things that we tried to do when we started with this whole proposal was to consider our position on research to provide for both public-private partnerships and improving the research capabilities of the state, but also not to interfere with university priorities. Quite frankly, university this year, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think if I'm right, there's a $30 million ask for health sciences, I believe, but there is no increase in agriculture through the university. And they set their priorities, and you know, I have to be honest, sometimes we'd like to see the priorities to be a bit different, but they have a lot of things that are competing, and they have to look at their priorities from their position. This proposal goes outside of that ag state special, and it does so for a couple of reasons, one of which is the fact that we would hope that it would provide for increased opportunities for communication with the board that's created under this bill, communication between the University of Minnesota and agricultural research and the commodity groups that are, and others that are part of that, including the 2 major farm organizations and agri-industry. So, Mr. Chairman, that gives you an idea of the some of the problems with the state special. The next one I wanted you to take a look at is actually where the different funding comes from in terms of rates of growth of real spending for the ag experiment stations. And what you'll see is that the first thing you look at is the 1970s through the 80s. And in that particular case, on a per-year basis, we had increases of state spending, decreases of federal spending, and industry spending. As you look across the situation, we're now ending up in a situation where you'll see that in the 1990s, for instance, it's a little difficult to look at this graph, but if you take a look at the first year, 1970s to 1980s, it's the light section. During the 70s and 80s, we had an increase on the state level of 4% a year. During the 1990s, you'll see that it declined by about 2.75% a year. And then you'll see that during the 2000s, it declined 4% a year from 2000 to 2014. So that's the trend that has taken place there, and that's what we're trying to reverse. The other two parts of the bill deal, as I mentioned, with the Rapid Response Fund that I already talked about to some degree. The Rapid Response Fund was started many years ago in response initially to the wheat rust situation and trying to bring to bear more immediate research capabilities to deal with emerging diseases that hit us year after year. The third part is something we talked about earlier today, in part in terms of agricultural education. And largely this money would try to help with the Farm Business Management Program, and there is going to be a hearing in the Ag Finance Committee further about that program and specific and other ag education things that will be coming through this committee. And so in a sense, that's a bit of a placeholder in this whole proposal. But ag education, in terms of technology transfer and the ability to produce new and young people for the future for agriculture, is a significant part of the entire research effort. So that you can't do one without the other. You have to have the live bodies available to go into the field. And so this is a very integral part of what we're trying to accomplish. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think that gives you, I guess on the next page, I did have a little bit to show you the diversity of the Rapid Response Fund in terms of the different kinds of things that it's involved with, the spread of invasive fruit flies, the Bunya viruses in Minnesota food animals, Asian biological control agent of the soybean aphid, renewable energy technologies in dairy and swine, and crop diseases and so forth. And as I mentioned, the last portion was the $4.8 million per biennium that would be included in the ag education. And our hope is that if you support this project, that you will be able to talk to your leadership and get targets that are significant enough that it can actually include. Because this is a major ask. Over the years, I've been here for 35 years, and over those years, I think, in my opinion, has been three major asks by agriculture. One was during the farm crisis, 1985 and 86, in which there was major asks, and many things happened at that time, from interest buy down to starting the mandatory mediation program to a lot of other things. At that time, we had a 26-article bill that dealt with the farm crisis in 1986. Later on, the Minnesota corn growers in particular and Minnesota soybean growers worked on biofuels, and that work continues in terms of, for instance, the bill that you had today with biomass and so forth, another major portion of agriculture. And I think this is the third. This is trying to restore the research capabilities of the state and make us a leader even more than we are, and try to move us forward in that area. We have had continual discussions with the University of Minnesota. There have been times in the past in which the university didn't always agree with what we were doing in every case, and I say we as agricultural folks, but we have got people very supportive, and I'm not going to call them down or anything like that, but I can tell you that in the audience there are people that are supporting this. And this supports all of agriculture. As I said, plant diseases, animal diseases do not attack one size of farm versus another size of farm. They don't attack, in a lot of ways. This is about basic research and human infrastructure, not project-based for agricultural research. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Question from Representative Bly.
Thank you, Chair. And I guess I'm a little bit curious about the path that this bill is going to take. I know it's going to go to government ops probably because it's creation of a board. Which finance committees will it go to?
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bly. It'll end up in the Agriculture Finance Committee. And with this one, just like the other one, I'll send it wherever it needs to go. Passionate about it, and the more people we touch on the way to the House floor, the more support we're going to gain. So as far as I know, and we could ask staff, as far as I know, the intention would go to GovOps and then to Ag Finance, I believe.
Thank you. A few more.
Representative Bly.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I support research, and I'm glad that you're bringing forth a good push to make that happen. And I know that Mr. Schoenfeld has a long career in supporting agriculture and introducing bills. And I remember testimony he gave in higher ed when we were talking about the Ag Special. I have some concerns about the makeup of the board and some other things. And if I could just make a couple comments. I know it's important in science what questions you ask, because that sets the direction for whatever you're going to pursue. And I think that for instance, if we look at, I'm concerned about chemicals and the effect that they have on our environment and agriculture. And Representative Hamilton, you and I have spoken about that, and you've been supportive of my efforts to discuss that, and I really appreciate your willingness to talk about these issues. I mean, in large part, the chemical industry had developed a lot of these chemicals during World War I and World War II, and they were designed, to kill people. And they had all these chemicals and wondered what to do with them, and they found agricultural applications for them. And it's not to say that science moves in different paths, but when you move down a path looking at chemicals as a solution to problems you have, you don't look at other things. You don't look at other ways of solving the problems, perhaps. And I think it's important that when we look at asking questions that science will consider, that we really cast a broad net and we look at lots of different things. One of the things that concerns me, because I also really, I have admired and come in contact and sometimes am accused of being a romantic because I like small and mid-sized farms. But I think the design of the family farm, if we look at that in comparison to other kinds of agricultural economies, is very strong and very equipped to deal with environmental issues and to be flexible and respond to the economic downturns and waves that may happen. And so and also looking at the fact that every year we seem to lose more and more small family farms. And the quick answer, of course, is, well, those farms aren't viable or they're not economically sustainable. I disagree with that, because I think in large part the path that we pursue with our science and research shapes the direction that our economy and our agriculture goes in a way that makes it less and less profitable for some smaller farms, and they can get forced out. So I guess one of the concerns I have is that we make sure, if we're gonna put more money into research, that again, as I said, we cast a very broad net. And so I'm a little bit concerned about what looks to me, I mean, there are a lot of groups included, but it also looks rather narrow in its focus to me. And I'm wondering if you could comment on how you decided on the makeup of the board.
Chair Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bly, first of all, the comment I want to make is I want it all. You know what? I want it all when it comes to agriculture. And not put a limitation on it, not a large versus small, not an organic versus conventional, traditional versus whatever, GMOs versus organic. No, I want it all. And to your comment about the small family farm, that's part of it as well, no question about it. And my argument would be, because of some of the things that have taken place, whether it was what we experienced back in the 80s when the parents were saying to their children, absolutely not, get out of agriculture, or whether it's been people who want to demonize agriculture, whatever it is, there's a reason why individuals aren't going back or wanting to stay home and take over the family farm. I want it all. And I think if we address the complete agriculture continuum, and be all inclusive, through our endeavors. I want this to be production ag focused. And the reason why we're talking production ag focused, if we don't have production ag, we have nothing. I mean, everything, and I mean everything, depends on production ag. And so that's why I want a strong focus on production ag. And if we start picking off on these fringes, you know, and don't stay focused on production ag, we're going to lose sight of what we're wanting to do and needing to do, because we have to double the world's food supply in 35 short years. And we can argue that, but I tell you what, the whole thing is, I guess I'm not willing to sit back and allow even more people in the world to starve to death. I'm just not going to do that. We need to. And the whole thing is, I want to also keep this to where we let others weigh in on this as far as how the dollars will be invested. And that's why we wanted to create this board. We're taking a look at as far as the production entities, if you will. And that's what we're trying to do. The universities and the Department of Ag, even though they're on the board, they're not voting members, right, Jerry? Yes. They're not voting members. And so when we're coming up with this, again, it was that whole thought process about production ag, and you know, I can't stress enough, I want it all. If you have other ideas, I don't know if Jerry wants to weigh in on this, I'm all ears, because I want this to work.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Schoenfeld.
Representative Bly, I guess I speak to a number of things. First of all, putting this in the context of the overall, recognize, for instance, at the University of Minnesota, we're not touching anything regarding the agricultural special. And under the agricultural special, there also already are things like the sustainable ag endowment that's there, and other kinds of things that exist. And so it's not taking anything away from anybody. Secondly, I would make the argument, not everybody would accept it, maybe you wouldn't accept it, but I would make the argument, as I said before, when you have a disease problem or a genetic problem that needs to be solved through genomics, it doesn't make any difference what size farm, who owns the farm, what kind of farm. It attacks everything the same way, and that's what we're talking about in terms of a lot of this basic research. So I don't think it's narrow to that extent. I think it affects everybody. I think the part that you're talking about is the economics. There's a different part that drives that. Third thing I'd like to point out is in terms of public research. For instance, I work with the Minnesota soybean growers, and they do put, as I mentioned, they're putting about $363,000 into plant breeding position. That plant breeding position, although there are people in the audience who could tell you more about than I can, but what I know about is this, that the public breeding situation is far better for you than the private breeding situation. When Pioneer or DeKalb or whoever is still out there gets a hold of a breeding program, they often connect that to Roundup Ready type crops. They connect it to certain kinds of, in many cases, right down to who finances the program. And that's a way, whether you're large or small, that's not, in my opinion, a good thing for agriculture, in that a large company is able to grab that kind of vertical integration of inputs. Plant breeding, for instance, the soybean plant breeding program, the genomics that is used there, to my knowledge, and we do have somebody that could maybe jump in here and help me here, but to my knowledge are not, for instance, many of the breeding attempts do not involve Roundup Ready soybeans, as an example. They're general soybean production, and so that those genomics are available whether they're for non-Roundup Ready or Roundup Ready soybeans, the genomics that are involved there. So I think it is the public research portion of things that actually gives you an opportunity to kind of combat against what I view as somewhat of a takeover by private, I want to call them multinational companies that try to control much of this area. The same is true of I think you could go across the board and take a look at that. So I think this public research portion of it is very important. I also can tell you that on the board, for instance, I know that Minnesota Farmers Union supports this, and they are certainly very strong in supporting all kinds of agriculture. The other thing I'm going to tell you something is something I've been talking to my people about, and yes, it has changed over the 35 years that I've been here. You know, you start looking at the marketplace, and one of the things, for instance, my pork producers this year are putting $1.2 million into research. One of the RFPs that they have out there, and one that they consider very significant, is an RFP that is put out to any researcher at the university, so it doesn't make a difference where they come from with it, but they're putting an RFP to deal with alternatives to antibiotic use. Why? Because, and yes, traditionally they've opposed the elimination of antibiotic use in livestock. But I can tell you antibiotic use is something that is in large livestock facilities and in very small ones. Matter of fact, in the very small ones sometimes is even more important. But I will tell you that the marketplace says we want to move away from this. You know, the other day I was at Whole Foods. I don't shop there too often because they're kind of spendy for my taste. But I was at Whole Foods, and I think it's the greatest market. I'm giving them a plug here. I guess I think it's in terms of presentation. But it was interesting to me to see that I went to pick up some Pillsbury dinner rolls, and my wife sent me to get them. And there were 8 dinner rolls in that little carton, and it cost $2.79. And right next to it, there was another set of dinner rolls that says, across the label, it says verified GMO-free wheat dinner rolls. The difference was that they cost $5.99, okay? There was a young couple that purchased the GMO verified free, and I did not. My point is simply that there is no wheat in the country that is GMO wheat. So it's a marketing thing to that extent. But the marketplace plays a big role. And that's the reason that a lot of these groups are looking at alternatives as well. They may have objected for a while, but they can't object any longer because the marketplace is driving it.
Representative Bly.
Thank you. And I do take comfort in your talking about public research as opposed to private research. I appreciate your awareness that just letting big companies drive research would not necessarily be a positive thing. But I also think that, again, you know, whether it's the food you put on your plate or whether it's the people who have a seat at the table, it does shape the outcome. That does shape what you're going to be choosing to eat, whatever. And I don't discount the fact that there may be some scams out there, as you were pointing out, with having the higher cost of non-GMO wheat or GMO wheat that's not labeled either way. But it's also possible that you know, as food production has gone forward over the many years, in order to either lengthen shelf life or to make food cheaper, it also can become less nutritious. As, for instance, we may remove the parts of the wheat grain or whatever that might be more nutritious, and you'd have to actually eat more white flour, for instance, than whole wheat flour in order to get the same nutritional value. But and those things aren't necessarily explained to the general public. That yes, you're getting cheaper food, but it might not be the best thing for you. The other comment I was going to make, you know, there's an economist with worldwide recognition named Amartya Sen, who made the statement that there are people that are starving in the world, and it's not because there's not enough food to feed them. It's because they don't have access to food, or because of various things they're prohibited from having access to food. And I think one of the things that we as wealthy and big countries need to look at is how do we assist countries to make sure that they are producing good food and producing food that that they can share with their constituents, rather than thinking that we necessarily have to produce a lot here that will be sold or sent elsewhere. So it's a complicated issue, and believe me, I certainly admire your passion, Representative Hamilton, for wanting to make sure that there aren't starving people. I think that's a laudable passion to get behind. I think that there are problems that we shouldn't overlook if that's our goal, that may occur. I mean, one of the things that's happened in agriculture, for instance, with, you know, we had surpluses in corn, and we said, we've got all this corn, we need to figure out what to do with it. You know, so we bring in biofuels and things like that, ethanol, and what do we get? More corn. So I think sometimes we can come up with solutions that don't necessarily solve the problem we have, but we need to make sure that when we're talking about these, and again, I'm not saying I don't support public research. I do. And I just think it's very important that we make sure that we set up a situation where we are asking the right questions and asking a broad range of questions and challenging each other on those questions. And so I may have some other questions later, but rather than dominate the discussion, I hopefully there'll be others who will ask questions too.
Representative Hamilton, any comments?
Mr. Chairman, we have another testifier.
Okay.
Chairman Bruce Clavin, I represent the Minnesota wheat growers and the Minnesota barley growers. I thought Jerry was phoning a friend, so I jumped in. I jotted a couple notes on Representative Black's point here to make quickly. I don't know if anybody ever answered your question on the makeup of the board. Part of the thinking was that the commodity groups would have skin in the game, and Jerry kind of referenced that. We have checkoffs, and we could pay millions of dollars with the university to partner. And so I think some members mistakenly tag the commodity groups around here as just sort of for the big guy or something, and we partner with the university on the checkoffs. I don't really think that's true. When the scab outbreak came in 94, 95, that was my first assignment here. First big assignment was to get that passed. It didn't matter if you had 50 acres of wheat or 5,000. The scab hit you, and it wiped it out. So it was really never a big guy, small guy thing. It was about the disease, as Jerry mentioned. And so that was part of the thinking on the board, was to take those dollars and match it with the U. Secondly, in wheat and barley too, the public variety is very important, because that's where our varieties come from, is from the public institutions, in particular in wheat and barley. And so I think what you're getting at more is not the breeding itself so much as the production method. So when the scab-resistant breeding was done in the 90s, you got the variety, but you could grow it organically, you could grow it sustainably, you could grow it with Folacure to kill the head blight. And so you're just, I think, getting at more of the production method than the outcome of the scab-free wheat variety.
Further comments or questions? Representative Lewin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to reiterate, the word checkoff was used here a moment ago, and there's a significant amount of money involved there that comes right out of the farmer's pocket. So make no mistake, those are people in the business at the very first production level that are willing to put some money forward, so I'm perfectly comfortable with the makeup of that board, because at the end of that, way at the end of that dollar, whatever it is, check off within the various commodity industries, there's a farmer looking out, making sure that research is out there to produce good, whole, safe food. That's what farmers are about. It's pretty basic stuff. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for bringing the bill forward. I'm a co-author. I'm glad to be a co-author. I want to just react to the comment about soybeans in the northern part of the Red River Valley. You brought me back memory lane, where my grandma lived in Wapata, and so we'd take a Highway 75 from, I grew up in Fargo, and we'd go down, my dad and I would go down and visit her, and frequently take Highway 75, and I remember his excitement, literal excitement, years ago when I'm a boy, when he saw soybeans growing in Wilkin County. And so anyway, there's some history there. I agree with you. I think your points about the value of public research is right on. I think the need to increase research dollars is thorough. The partnerships with the commodity councils are critical and valuable, and also the idea of continuity in terms of research. I've heard it all along. I also have some questions about the board, and I expressed that as I signed on to the bill, and they remain. And it kind of came with some of the part of the presentation. You talk about the consumer changes. I think we need to know more about the consumer changes, and this might be an opportunity to do that. You mentioned protecting the environment, and everybody in this committee and the Finance Committee knows I'm concerned about how agriculture and the environment interchange, and I think there's some room to move there. And then also, you also hear me talk frequently about development of markets, and I think I guess what I'm saying is I feel that there's maybe a missed opportunity to focus in some other areas beyond the productivity angle, and that comes in. I saw that that's part of the amendment, and I respect that that you've got the bill the way you want it. But I do think there's a missed opportunity in order that I think there's some needs that we might be wanting to look at, and I would encourage you to do that. And also just in general, a wider board. My experience with boards, my experience with decision-making in general, especially with public funds, is we benefit, we're wiser when we have a broader view on it. And so I guess my question is if you would look at broadening the board in some ways to deal specifically, and my concerns are with environmental protection as it relates to agriculture, consumer changes, and that whole economics piece, which I keep calling and I keep looking for. And one of my interest areas is that came up the other day with the development of a market for alfalfa, and some opportunities there. So to take better advantage of those opportunities. So again, that's my request, and you don't need to respond now, but that's my point.
Chair Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know what, a couple things. First, going to Representative Bly. You know, it was Norman E. Borlaug that said, never think for a minute that we are going to build permanent peace in this world on empty stomachs and human misery. It won't happen, and the sooner our leaders at all levels of society reflect on that, the better. And you know what, we are, in my opinion, we are right here, right now, right today, leading the charge on global food production. Now, that doesn't mean that we're hyper-focused on only raising this in Minnesota. You know what? Why not follow Norman E. Borlaug's lead and travel all over the world and share our knowledge and expertise? And you know, he started the Green Revolution, right? So just because we're talking about Minnesota, it doesn't contain it only to Minnesota as far as the production, the knowledge, the expertise. We are leaders. You take a look at the ag businesses that we have, the farmers that we have, all the industry professionals, the land-grant university, and you take all of that combined. We have, it's interesting on why Minnesota is being looked at. Not only are we the birthplace of the Green Revolution, we are the cradle of modern supercomputing. And we had the first modern supercomputer. Today we're in the top 5 of the most powerful academic supercomputers here in the state of Minnesota. You take a look at opening the power of global information sharing, the Global Food and Agribusiness Hub. That's another area why people are so focused on recognizing Minnesota when it comes to leading this initiative. We have headquarters to numerous Fortune 500 companies, and we have a vibrant, as far as new agricultural firms and ideas, initiatives, entrepreneurs, right here in the state of Minnesota. That's why it's so exciting. And you know, Representative Johnson, I fully understand what you're saying. My concern is we have a limited amount of dollars, and we are looking at investing in production research. That's where I'm starting. If we start including everything, right, and be all-encompassing, that pool of money is going to shrink and shrink and shrink. And we have dollars, we have other dollars and pools of money out there to focus on water quality, to focus on some of these other things that we bring forward. We don't have a lot of pool or a lot of dollars there specifically going into production ag research. And that's why I get pretty concerned. That's why I get pretty concerned if we start diluting, if you will, what it is that we're trying to accomplish here as well.
Time for Representative Johnson to follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Hamilton. My thoughts were actually where those interface. I think protecting, as you recognize, consumer changes, protecting the environment. I like to add the developing markets. I think that all of those issues interface very clearly, in my mind, with production ag, and so I think the adding people to the board that would have some better understanding or more focus on those sorts of interconnections, I think makes for a better board. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to engage in this conversation. I'm a co-author on the bill. I support the bill, and I am excited to see the potential for it. I do have a couple of questions, though, not so much about the makeup of the board, except for one, the person representing the ag industry. others, commodity groups or others may have a more of a process that they could use to name that person. I'm just wondering about the person who might represent the ag industry, how that, since I have an ag industry in my district, and I'm just wondering how will that actually work? And then just another question just about the expectations of the board. I see that they're not to be compensated, but it appears as though they'll have a pretty heavy load of things to do, and I'm just wondering the anticipation of how many times they're going to meet and how it's actually going to work, and more the mechanics of it. And again, I'm very supportive of it, and that those may be GovOps kinds of questions as well, but I'm maybe preparing you for that, because I'm just thinking we need to know what those answers might be, I think.
Thank you.
This bill has more stops, but a quick answer, Representative Hamilton.
Mr. Chair, to the statewide industry, you point out a good point. I think it may be a drafting error that we missed something there, in the fact that what we were looking at was a statewide somebody that represents statewide agricultural industry. And to be blunt, it probably was the Ag Growth Council that we had in mind. So it wasn't the idea of picking and choosing between different people. It was somebody that represented the entire area. In terms of the details of those things, all I can tell you is we basically take $42,900,000 and put it on a stump through the Ag Special for the University of Minnesota. And we tell them, go ahead and take that money and do your best with ag research, okay? And we've done that for years and years and years. And some of that involves things that Representative Clark has asked about. So it's not like this is just the only thing there is out there, okay? In addition to that, 25% of the funding that goes into approximately 25% of the funding that goes into CFANS, as an example, comes from the operation and maintenance budget of the University of Minnesota. There are 8 different pots of funds that feed into that area. Most of them have been declining. That's why we're here with this bill. The one exception is gifts, where people give money to the university to do things. And so don't view this in a vacuum. There are other areas out there, including the Department of Agriculture and others, that are doing some of the things you're talking about. We have marketing areas in the Department of Ag. We have marketing areas that go through the Ag Special for this as well. So it's not, don't view it in a vacuum. So I would hope that as we look at this, we don't have every answer, and I would hope that as this thing moves forwards, about every specific answer as to how many times a year they're going to meet is an example. But I think that all of these people working together and being supported by this legislature, working with the University of Minnesota in particular, and MNSCU as well, in some particular areas, can come up with a good operating venue to do this in. And I would only state that you put $1.2 billion to the University of Minnesota. We don't even have a board of regent that represents agriculture, okay? And that's the one that makes the decisions for that. That's the board that makes the decision there. And we don't have anybody that represents agriculture on the board of regents, okay? And so don't get too critical of some of this. I think it's a good thing to get this discussion and try to make it better, but we're trying to do that. We're not trying to, just shove something down somebody's throat.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make it
Representative
clear, I'm not being critical of
No,
it.
I know you.
I'm trying to hopefully enhance it so that you're better prepared as you make the next stop.
Yes, thank you.
Chair Hamilton.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let's keep talking, right? We want to make this right. I ask for everybody's support.
I thought you had a comment on that. We did have one last question from Representative Bly.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of time, I'll try to be brief. I too, I don't want you to think that I'm just being critical for the force of being critical. My concern is that when you have a fairly like-minded group together, and I know you mentioned the Farmers Union, there are times when a certain perspective can be left out. I certainly support the response to certain crises that might come up, like the diseases that you mentioned. That's certainly important and a very valid point, and yes, it does affect all farmers. But sometimes if you have board members who have a perspective and don't include others, that other perspective can be lost. I just speak to you to make sure that you do what you can to look at a broad perspective. As you say, Representative Hamilton, you want everything. Let's make sure we don't leave out something accidentally.
And I would just add that the concept for this bill is wonderful. And we need to eye the big prize of getting more funding into research. To me, education is huge as well in agriculture. So that's the general area this bill is going to, and let's keep that in mind. Any final comments, Chair Hamilton?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, just thank you. You know, just having these conversations and dialogue makes us better, makes it even stronger. I appreciate it. I am going to need all of your support, all of your help. This is a heavy lift. We're asking for some additional dollars. I'm working with our leadership as well. So anything that we can do to get everybody on board here, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair Hamilton renews his motion that House File 779, as amended, be re-referred to the Committee on Government Operations and Elections. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And those against, same sign. Motion passed. The hour is nigh or near with us, and this committee stands adjourned.